Last video we started talking about some extremely important concepts of storytelling. Sequences, sequence climaxes, act climaxes, and set piece scenes. The Hunger Games really is an excellent movie to watch to absorb this concept of sequences, because the sequences in this movie are so precise, concise, and contained. You can actually easily name each sequence. Sequence 1, of course, we would call the reaping. Sequence 2 we could call the capital, or maybe to the capital, because the first part of the sequence is the train journey to the capital. Naming the sequences is a useful thing to do when you're studying movies, and of course it can be helpful for your own story as well. So first I had you watch sequence 1, which is about 18 minutes long here. It climaxes with the reaping scene at about 16 minutes in, and then there's a tag, which is the goodbyes scene at the end. And then hopefully you watch the next 18 minutes, sequence 2, which climaxes as the end of Act 1. That's generally about 30 minutes into a movie. In the Hunger Games, it's more like 36. We've seen that both these sequences build to a climax, and that climax is also a set piece scene. Now, I'm assuming that everyone knows what a climax is. Well, it's the same in storytelling. Dramatic and escalating tension, building to a big finish, hopefully a sense of completion, at least for the moment. In a good film, every one of the sequences will build to a sequence climax. And the sequence 2, sequence 4, sequence 6, and sequence 8 climaxes are also act climaxes. We can see this on the story grid, which I sent you in your workshop materials. Now, I'm talking about 8 sequences in a 2-hour movie. If you have a shorter movie, you might have fewer sequences. And if you have a longer movie, you can easily have more sequences. This is approximate. Now, if you've worked in screenwriting or you've done some reading about screenwriting, you've probably heard these act and sequence climaxes called plot points and pinch scenes, or breaks, or button scenes, or act outs. In theater, they're called curtain scenes. They're all just names for climaxes. And I like the word climax because who doesn't? One of the ways that filmmakers create these climaxes is by building set piece scenes. There are 2 meanings to this term. In the early days of filmmaking, movies were shot on sound stages, on sets. They didn't shoot on location. The camera was stationary and delicate. So to create a sense of location and spectacle, they'd often build a special set to add visual excitement to these climactic scenes. So set piece literally referred to that big set. But the word has taken on another meaning too. Screenwriters and directors often sell movies by pitching the climactic set pieces to the studio. The executives want to know how to sell the movie. They want to hear what the trailer scenes are going to be. That's often a creative trap because the studio dumps so much money into these set piece scenes. If it turns out down the line that the scene doesn't really work for the movie, the studio will often insist on keeping it because they've dumped so much money into it. The piece is set. It's staying in no matter what. That explains a lot of movies you've seen, doesn't it? But for our purposes as writers, what goes into a set piece and how can we use it in our books? Let's take a look at how The Hunger Games creates the reaping set piece. There is tension and suspense and dread building throughout sequence 1 as we hear about what the reaping is and what it means to our characters. A lot of the suspense is that there's a big question to be answered in this scene. Who will be chosen? Suspense is also built because there's a ticking clock. The reaping is going to take place that day. The stakes here are literally life and death. To be chosen in this lottery is almost certainly a death sentence. There's also a big ritualistic preparation scene in the village where the children are presented as sacrifices. A preparation scene can be a great way to build suspense, and in this case, fear. The reaping is also a crowd scene, which creates a sense of bigness as the whole village congregates. And yes, there is a big set. The amphitheater where the reaping takes place. The audience also has an emotional stake in the outcome. We don't want Prim or Katniss or Gale to be chosen. But notice how the author has already made us complicit in this game. We're kind of okay with someone else dying, just not our heroes. And there's also a big twist. Prim is chosen, as in her dream, and we experience that horror. And then Katniss jumps up and volunteers in her place. When you get a chance, try watching it again and see what else the filmmakers are doing to create this set piece. Last video, I gave you some questions to answer about sequence 2. So here's another question for sequence 2. What techniques are the filmmakers using to create the climax of Act 1, that set piece? Now, set pieces don't have to be these huge arena or action scenes that we see in the Hunger Games. Action movies, sci-fi movies, they're going to have bigger set pieces because that's one of the promises of those genres. But in a comedy, the set pieces are going to be comedic. And in a romance, they're going to be romantic. In a horror movie, they'll be horrific. Try this. What's the most famous set piece from Psycho? What's the most famous set piece from When Harry Met Sally? Those set pieces are so memorable, I don't even have to tell you what they are, do I? So you see what I mean. You don't have to blow up Manhattan. It's the emotional bigness of the scene that counts. So here's your next assignment. Make a list of memorable and favorite set piece scenes. And once you've done some brainstorming on that list, it would be really useful to take your own story and see what set pieces you have going on. Are there scenes that you can make into set pieces? See what you can come up with, and we'll talk much more about it next video.